Facebook. I'm here with Malini again today. We get a treat to have two conversations with Malini about Vedic astrology. And today we are going to talk about how karma really works and how karma ripens. And I'm reminded of the other day we had a talk with one of my teachers and friends, Teo Semko, and he was talking about the um, the kind of conflict between the philosophy that says I create my own reality and the philosophy that says everything is predetermined and we are a result of causes and conditions. And I think that this conversation on karma will really add to that discussion, especially as it applies to healing and our consciousness and as it relates to healing. So I'm excited about this conversation, and thank you for being with us again, Malini.
Justine, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. You're right. Karma is a very heavy, loaded word. And most people don't even understand what karma is, right? Uh, when we talk about karma, even in the South Asian communities, it's almost talked as if it's a punishment that you're going through, or life is a suffering, and that suffering is because you have certain set of karmas or good karmas or bad karmas. And so people are so disconnected with consciousness itself. They are disconnected with how karma works. And then they're disconnected with how to bring all of it in alignment for their evolution, right? That's why we are on this planet. Uh, and yes, we talk about healing, but what healing really is aligning ourselves right back to a path that we all are on. We are all on our journey. We don't know what that journey is. We don't know that destination. We are like this river. I'd like to give that example of a river that leaves its source. And when the river leaves its source, it doesn't know it's going to meet the ocean. All it can see is what's in front of it, and it's just carving its path, right? In the hopes, or maybe have an inner knowing that it's going to reach the ocean one day or next. And it's that inner knowing. We can't explain it. We all know we are on a journey, we're going somewhere. And then healing and spirituality is what aligns us in that journey, have less resistance. So this whole talk about karma that I created, and we're going to share a presentation, uh, is is basically talking about how to have less resistance to life in general. I hope that's the take home message. And feel free to interrupt me. Feel free to constantly ask questions. I love that. I love a dialogue versus a monologue. That's what makes things very rich. I think we should get started with the presentation, and I've just put in some few examples and tidbits so that you can start thinking about it, and it gets your uh, it provokes a thought process in you. When I started putting this talk together, the one before this, when I started putting this talk together, um, I started looking up for what people call karma. Like, I intrinsically know there's an inner knowing of what karma is. But when you start looking online for references of what the English translation for karma is, it's you find there is no one word that really defines what karma is. The Sanskrit word karma, right? So the loose translation of karma is action or doing, but it's much more layered. And hopefully through this presentation, you will understand how layered it is. So it's action, but we talk about kriyas, and kriya is also action, right? It's the act, actually, it's the activity that we are doing. And then karma has two parts. It's the action, but it's the executed action, which has a consequence. So it involves a cause and an effect. It's like when you're on a seesaw, any movement you do that moves the seesaw one way or the other, right? There's a cause and an effect. And then the other important part that most people leave out of this whole conversation is the intention behind that executed action or a planned action. And that intention itself is so carries so much energy and force that it's an act itself, which is kind of left out. So, like I said, contemporary scholars, they profess that the consequence of executed actions or karma to is somewhere sometime in the future, right? So what that's the general scholarly philosophical thinking that uh, what you're experiencing right now are due is because of your karma in the past, and what you're doing right now, the karmas that you're performing right now, will have a consequence in the future, and that's what causes the whole cycle of reincarnation, birth and death, because you're born here to work through certain karmas. The
Sorry,
next
I
slide.
just had to I had to pause so that I could let some more friends in. When we're in the presentation mode, I can't work with the Zoom. So just so you know that that might happen.
That's totally okay. I don't think so. I have animations, so we should be fine if you're not even in the presentation mode, and that works easy. So yesterday we talked about consciousness and how spirit takes form by applying, just to understand that whole process, we applied the laws of quantum physics, right? And I thought the best way to explain karma is looking at karma through the laws or the lenses of thermodynamics that all of us have studied in middle school or high school and have some idea of thermodynamics. So I'm going to use some really simple examples from thermodynamics to explain karma. The next slide. So the first law of thermodynamics is energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. So the net energy, the total amount of energy in the universe, is constant or zero. Everything works out to a zero. And that, like you can see in the diagram, and it's like a seesaw, right? If you do something, it will have a counter effect. If you try to counter something, it will have a counter effect.
Oop.
Actions carried out to balance the net energy in the conscious universe. The universe itself is conscious, breathing, alive. So karma is a set of actions you carry to just balance the energy in the universe. The next slide. So this is a simple organic chemistry reaction that most of you have seen, right? We have acetic acid. When it's dissolved in water, water is a charged molecule. It will dissociate into an acetate ion and a hydronium ion. These are just ions. And this is a reaction that is displayed at equilibrium. So the forward reaction, K1, forward reaction is equal to the backward reaction. That means the system is in equilibrium. If we change anything in here, if I add more water to dilute the solution, the reaction would change such that the amount of ions would change, and then the backward reaction would change so that the system would finally reach equilibrium. At equilibrium, the free energy, in chemistry mostly is heat, right? The free energy of the system is zero. So the system is not absorbing heat nor it is releasing heat to balance out the equation. So karma is like this, if you think about it, it's like this complex chemical reaction that is constantly striving to balance itself out. Both ends of the reaction are trying to balance itself out. The next slide. So this is just the free energy, Gibbs free energy, the delta G that we are seeing there. And it's made of two components. One is enthalpy, which is heat, what I talked about. And then the other is entropy, which is S. And entropy is just constant movement, random movement of particles. So in the diagram below, you can see a solid where the molecules or the particles are tightly packed. The liquid has more motions of of its molecules, and the gas state has a complete random motion of its molecules, right? And we constantly hear this term that universe is in a constant state of expansion. What does that mean? It's in a constant state of entropy, or it's randomly moving. So if the right side of that equation, that S is constantly changing, what would you expect? The rest of the parameters in the equation would try to change in order so that the whole equation comes out, the net comes out to be zero, right? So we have to start thinking about karma in a way wherein the things that we are experiencing on an individual level on this planet is a part of that universe itself expanding. It's in the constant state of entropy. It's in the constant state of movement, which creates these energy balances that we are figuring it out in the conscious universe. The next slide. This is for those who love algebra, right? And it's a polynomial equation. The thing with polynomial equation is the entire sum, the entire equation has to always be zero, or if you move parameters to the other side of the equation, if you move, for example, in this, the number 12 to the other side, the entire equation has to be equal on both sides. The equation always has to be net equal to zero. So if you think about karma, it's like this complex polynomial equation that is trying to balance itself out. It's trying to be net zero. So if I say karma is action, it really doesn't explain how the universe as a total is trying to work itself out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful explanation. Yeah.
The next slide. So yeah, karma is like much more complex than our individual minds on this planet can comprehend, right? In both pictures, you can see how if I move a ball in any of these spheres, it will create a ripple effect on the other spheres. So when we think about karma, we think about such an individualized, such an individualized concept. It's my karma. It's not. What you do in the world, what you do here on the planet has a ripple effect throughout the universe, whether you can perceive it or not. However small you think you are, or your presence on this planet is, it is having this ripple effect on the universe. So it's not just you working out the karma, it's the entire universe going through that karma with you. The next slide. So, and I touched upon this a little bit. Karma is such a confusing term because a lot has gotten lost in translation. In the Vedic times, when they use the word karma, they would really use it in the context of a sacrifice they were making for a yajna or to get an outcome. In Abrahamic religions like Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, that the whole philosophy of karma, even though they don't use that word, but the philosophies of reward and punishment. If I do something, a higher divine law giver will take care of me. If I'm not doing something, I'll be punished by the same lawgiver. So there's this reward and punishment relationship. In contrast, the most Vedic traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, they think of karma as a universal autonomous law. No divine being or external agent can actually intervene with that karmic cycle. In fact, when you read scriptures and when you read all these mythological stories, even divine incarnations like Krishna and Rama, they incarnate on this planet and they have to participate in carrying out that karmic cycle, whether it's of their lineage, whether it's of their clan, whether it's of their kingdom, whether it's of their people. Their entire epic revolves around how they are participating in that karmic cycle, right? And so, the law of karma has a more non-theistic uh, flavor to it, right? And karma, again, in most Vedic traditions, is not very, it's not just individualized. Yes, we all have individual karma, but then there is the shared or the collective karma that has become like a new age word, right? Gets thrown out all over the place. The collective, what the collective is going through, but that's what they mean. They mean the shared karma. There's this individual karma that's ripening on a very personal, intimate level, but that individual karma becomes a part of the bigger karma of the lineage where you come. That's why all Vedic traditions have something built in to honor their ancestors, honor their pitris, right? There is the family karma, the karma of the community, uh, the karma of the region, the country. If you're living in America right now, there's a certain kind of karma you're sharing with all the people. If you're living in India, you're sharing a certain kind of karma with all the people, right?
There's a question coming through. It's a pretty deep question, so I'm not sure we can talk about it or we can ruminate on it and come back to it at the end. Umesh says in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, you are not the doer, I am the doer. If that is true and God is the doer, and then we have to assume here like the meaning of God and Krishna, but then why do we face the consequences of our actions? What does this do to the theory of karma? It's like it's an interesting thing.
Thank you. If you can hold that question on for just 3 minutes, we are going to get into it. So the concept of what God is and who's the doer and who's not, and who is bearing the consequence of the action. We'll get into it in just a minute. So this will clarify, and if it doesn't, then I'm happy to have open the floor for further conversation.
Next slide.
Next slide. So yesterday when I presented about how spirit takes form, we touched upon how consciousness, what gives rise to consciousness on this planet, right? And it is the sacred geometry between the sun, earth, and moon. That when these three locked into a sacred geometry about 100,000 years ago, it started to give rise to conscious life on this planet. So I'm going to dive a little bit into Advaita philosophy, which is the Paramatman, or the one without the other. Param meaning the ultimate one, Atman meaning the soul. And of course, there is no English translations for these words, so we use sloppy words like soul, right, to explain something that is just close enough. So this ultimate being, and you can think of the universe as this one big living being that can be an intangible force, that can be Shiva or Krishna. You can call it by any name, but it's the one without the other. So there is this one without the other, which in astrology we see that as the sun in the chart. That holds this world together. It's the supreme self. It's infinite. It's constantly expanding. It's infinite. It doesn't have a beginning and the end. It's eternal. And it is the Jivatman. I'll explain what the Jivatman is, without avidya or ignorance. On the other hand, Jivatman is the individual soul that you have incarnated. So, and the philosophy is, I think I touch upon it in the next slides, but the philosophy is that because the one without the other wanted to experience itself back the only way to do it was to create these experiences as Jivatman, as the individual soul. It's the reflection of the Paramatman in avidya or ignorance, or there is this illusion of ignorance means the illusion of separateness, right? Uh, and when I talk about reflection of Paramatman, we talk about the moon, like the moon reflects the sun's light, right? So the Jivatman, in really layman's terms, in a very simplistic way, could be seen as our mind or the moon, wherever that is placed. That's where it incarnates, or that's where the energy comes through in the chart. It's finite, it's conditioned by the environment it is in, it's conditioned by the circumstances and the collective karma. So the Jivatman literally is the Paramatman plus avidya or the ignorance. It is the Paramatman, but now living in that illusion and then trying to find its way back to its source. It's like that river that's trying to find its way back to the ocean. So this is a little bit of Advaita philosophy, and there are very various versions of it, but I'm various derivations of it. I'm not going to say versions. There are very various derivatives of Advaita philosophy, and I'm talking in very simplistic terms here. Next slide. So yeah, this is what we touched upon. What gives birth to karma or Maya? Maya is that illusion that you're separate, right? And it's that desire of that supreme self to experience itself back, right? If you didn't have sensory organs, you could never experience life. There would be no sense of life. So we are like the sensory organs. We are like the eyes, nose, ears, mouth, skin, touch, right, of the Paramatman, through which he's experiencing or she is experiencing itself back. So the evolution of the Jivatman, our pathway is to evolve and to destroy any avidya or any ignorance, become Jivan Mukta, that enlightenment is not being free from karma, but it's being knowing or being in connection with that Paramatman. And the evolution of the Jivatman requires itself to distill itself back to the Paramatman, which requires participation in karma. So this whole process of the universe or the Paramatman or the one without the other trying to experience itself back in various forms is what creates karma. Mm. So in astrology, we see karma. We start to figure out where karma lies in the chart through planets. Planets, the Sanskrit word is graha. Graha literally means to grab. So they grab your psyche, they grab the mind, and then wherever these planets are placed, that's the area of life. They grab your mind and focus it there. So there are 9 planets. Sun represents powers, confidence, radiance. Moon represents our connection. It's the feeling, intuition. It's where like karmas penetrate our psyche. Mars represents strength, discipline, self-will, courage, the ability to fight. Mercury represents intelligence, communication, flexibility, trying to figure out situations. That I'm a figure it out kind of a person is Mercury. Jupiter represents hopes and teachings and higher philosophies, which are not tangible. They're more metaphysical in nature. Venus represents happiness, beauty, enjoyment, respect. How do you work with other people in this world? Saturn represents structure, pressure of time. We have only so much time. We need to get things going. Come on. Limitations, perseverance, commitment. And then we have 2 shadow planets called Rahu and Ketu. And they're literally from our vantage point on Earth, the sun's orbit and the moon's orbit from where we are standing on Earth, where they intersect. They intersect at 2 points. The north node of that point, the north end of that point is called Rahu. And Rahu is like an advancing army where your soul is trying to conquer a lot of territory where it has not conquered in its past lives. And then Ketu is is the one that turns away from the world. It's the south end of that intersection, this descending end, and it's the one where the soul has already conquered a lot of territory in several lifetimes, and it's turning away from that area of life. And then these 9 planets affect these 12 houses, and these 12 houses are areas of life. So you can start to get a little bit more specific. What areas of life are these planets, bringing more flavor in, whether it's self, which is the 1st to 4th house, whether it's the others, which is the 5th to 8th house, and whether it's the universe, it's the higher self, right? It's the Paramatman itself, which is the 9th to 12th house. So these areas of life is where these grahas would really grab the jivatma, the mind, will grab the mind and like pin it there and be like, okay, this is what we are working on in this lifetime. There is another nuance in Vedic astrology. Oh, okay. So we touched upon it, that the karmas enter the mind first, and it's based on the timing or the ripening of karmas. And we're going to touch upon this nuance of Vedic astrology and how it is done. And that's where the whole predestined versus free will question comes into being, wherein the karmas do enter the mind based on the timing or the ripening of certain things within you. But then how you act on it, the intention plus the executed action, that is left up to you. And I'll pull out a quote from Bhagavad Gita towards the end. We have it there, which also highlights this point, wherein the karmas enter the mind, but you have the right to execute them with a certain intensity or intention behind those actions.
I heard a Vedic astrology teacher, I'm trying to remember who it was, who likened this to, a cow with a stake and attached to it. And the cow can wander, attached to that stake, but they can't pick up the stake and drag it with them. And that really clarified to me, just as in an image, this issue of predestination versus free will in the ripening of karmas and what we see in the chart. It's you have that choice to move throughout the field, but you're not going to pick up your stake of karma and just move it entirely to a different field.
Yeah. And if you don't work it out in this lifetime, then there will be the other lifetime where it becomes even more compelling.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, right? For example, I'm guilty of binge eating at times, right? And this is just a very simplistic example. And I can ignore that pizza that I really want for a week. But then on the 7th day, I'm like, I can't ignore this urge anymore. I have to have that slice of pizza. And you can think about that karma the same way. It enters your mind, and there's that push or that inclination to do it, and that it's probing and it's probing. And it depends on how refined your mind is. That's where healing, yoga, meditation comes. How refined your mind is, where you can ride above that inclination or above that thing that is ripening within you. You can ride with it, you can go with the flow, which is also perfectly okay. Or you can let that thing, that karma that's ripening in your mind, completely trample you and destroy you. That's where all that struggling and suffering comes, right? So you, depending on how refined your mind is, which is what we are trying to do in all yogic practices. Ayurveda does that to a big extent. And this starts to build into that Ayurveda foundation, right? The tamas, rajas, and sattva. uh, astrology talks about it, yoga talks about it, all Vedic philosophies talk about it. You can ride it, you can ride above it, or you can be crushed by it. Uh, and so that's where you can start to see the nuance between what is predestined versus what's free will. The next one. So, ripening of karmas. We are all born with certain tendencies and certain inclinations. That's what I'm going to refer to as karmas. That certain urges that we want to act on, and whether we act on it or not is a different question. And the ripening of these karmas can be seen. This is, I'm talking about purely about Vedic astrology. Can be seen through something called as Vimshotri Dasha cycle. So based on where your moon was placed when you were born, you are put into a dasha cycle. Your mind goes through a series of dasha cycles, which is pretty, you can make pretty good predictions with it. You can also, I've used dasha cycles to like really articulate what that person is going through without them ever having to articulate that ever in their life. They're like, okay, I was just thinking that, but you said it. It's all based on how you read the mind through this Vimshotri Dasha cycles. And it's based on the placement of moon. So on the chart on the left, it's the same charts I showed yesterday. We have somebody who's an Aries rising with moon in the constellation or the nakshatra of Magha, that falls in Leo, right? And then Magha activates Ketu. So when this person was born, they were born in the Dasha cycle of Ketu. And then they went into, after Ketu, what this come? Venus, right? They went into Venus. And I have the whole scheme there. Similarly, on the right, we have somebody who's a Scorpio rising, who was, when they were born, their moon was in Taurus in the nakshatra of Kritika. So when they were born, Kritika activates Sun, the planet Sun, right? So when they were born, they were placed in the dasha cycle of Sun. And let's distill down what dashas really are in the next slide.
And I
So
just wanted to mention that dashas are really unique to Vedic astrology. We don't find anything like this in Western astrology or other systems. It's a really unique property of Vedic astrology, and it is absolutely deeply predictive. So I just wanted to mention that.
yeah, that's correct. And you know why it is unique to Vedic astrology? Can anybody take a guess?
Tell us.
Because especially the Vimshotri Dasha system uses nakshatras, right? The constellations for its calculations.
Yeah.
And dashas are really really looking at the whole nakshatra system and bringing that into the chart. So it's slightly independent of the sign itself, but of course the houses play a big role, right? So
someone got the answer right on Facebook. It's a little delayed to where we are, so bravo.
Yeah, whoever it is, what's his name or her name?
It's Umesh. He said because nakshatra is unique, so that's great.
Yeah, great work, Umesh. So these ripening of karma. So we saw in the previous slide with somebody with moon in Kritika. So when they were born, they started to experience the dasha of Sun. And when I explain to clients and when I explain to people whom I'm talking about, I tell them to think about these dasha cycles as a university you're going to, and the dean of that university is Sun. And then Sun would take over or would lead the way in teaching your soul or helping your soul evolve, helping that Jivatman evolve, so it moves closer to the Paramatman. So Sun Dasha then lasts for about 6 years. Moon will come after Sun. So these are, I've written them in chronological order. Moon comes after Sun. and its length is about 10 years. So it will try to teach you about connection. It would try to teach you about intuition and about feeling. If you're very intellectual and not a feeling being, how do you feel into things, right? Um, and you can think about the Paramatma and experiencing these different things through these different planets through you being the vehicle for the ultimate being, right? Mars then comes after Moon and then teaches you strength, discipline, courage, and it lasts for about 7 years. Rahu, like we talked about, is the conquering territory, and it's one of the long dashas. It's about 18 years. I'm actually right now almost at the tail end of my Rahu dasha, and it's like conquering armies. It's conquering territory in this life, but in a very exponential way. It's not incremental. It's very exponential. It takes leaps and bounds in areas of life where you probably didn't have enough experience or didn't have enough focus in your lifetime. And by lifetime I mean several births, right? Jupiter then comes after Rahu because Rahu has been on this conquest in a very random kind of way, where Jupiter comes after Rahu. It's for 16 years, and then it starts to uh, add meaning or philosophy to all that what Rahu has gone through or experienced, right? It's trying to put it into context. Then Saturn comes, and Saturn is again one of those long dashas, and then it brings structure and discipline. So if you really want your mind to start to mature in that meaning that you were trying to give it, then you need to have that structure and discipline. So Saturn comes after Jupiter and says, okay, let's create this discipline or confinement or limitation wherein we'll add certain amount of pressure to you so that you start to mature. It's like I hate to give the example, but it's like wine, right? And you store it under pressure for a long amount of time for it to finally give that flavor. So think about Saturn in that way. Then Mercury comes after Saturn, and then it's helping the uh, the Jivatma to have intelligence and be able to communicate about all that it has gone through in this lifetime and that journey, right? Um, Ketu comes after Mercury, and it's a shorter dasha. It's 7. So Sun, Mars, Ketu, they're pretty intense planets, and then pretty intense dashas. And then Ketu sees how it's 7 years long, but it sees how futile everything is. It has the attitude of been there, done that. I'm going to none of this makes sense. Where in Jupiter you were trying to make sense of everything, Ketu is like, no matter what you do, the world doesn't make sense. So what does make sense? What really makes sense? And that's the quest that Ketu is interested in. It's not interested in the quest in the world. And then after Ketu, we get Venus, which is happiness. And it's one of the longest dashas because Venus is it's a very gentle planet. So it takes time. It doesn't shock you into things, right? It's a very gentle planet. And it really shows you how futile. First, it tries for the Jivatman to reach an equilibrium in the world with other people, but truly, it's real happiness. If Venus is very intelligent in the chart, it realizes that the true happiness is being happy for no reason. It's just happy for no reason. So this entire dasha scheme is about 120 years. Of course, modern science or medicine has not reached that stage where we all are living up to 120 years. Of course, if you have yogic practices, you can. But it takes about that 120-year cycle for that soul to completely ripen, right? And that's how we study ripening of karmas, through astrology and through charts and through seeing where the individual is in this dasha scheme and what they are going through. It adds a lot of nuance to uh, understanding what karmas are ripening. And that's what I use Vedic astrology primarily for. I have done predictions, and if you're immersed in it, predictions are really easy as against what other people say. The difficult part is understanding what karmas that person is what karmas are ripening for that individual, or what, even if you're looking at your chart, what karmas are ripening for you, because it can feel very confusing, right? And if you put it into context, you can really align yourself in your journey, in your path where you're going towards. So that's the more difficult part of doing astrology. The predictive part is slightly more easy.
I just wanted to mention, because a lot of viewers won't have familiarity, and you said this already, but I just wanted to re-articulate it. So the order is always the same, but where an individual enters into that order will be quite different. So you could be born in the middle of the Ketu cycle, and so you're in this Ketu energy until you're 4 years old, and then when you're 4 you go into Venus cycle, and then you have 20 years until you're 24, and then you'll go to Sun. So unlike, because people in Western astrology, the Saturn return in Western astrology always happens at the same year for everyone. Like, you hit a certain age and you're considered to go through this cycle. With this system, everyone is moving through their own path, but in the where they enter that path is different. So I just wanted to make that point.
That is a great point, Justine. Yes, and great elaboration. That is true. Based on where your moon is, and we can see the example in this chart. Based on where your moon is, you enter the cycle there. So in this chart, I was giving an example. The person is, a Pisces rising, but their moon is in Sagittarius, and it's in the nakshatra of Purvashada, right? And so Purvashada is actually activates Venus. And so in the middle, you can see right under the word Vimshotri, we have Venus. And this person, I actually did not put their birth information, but they were born in 1974. So they had, by 79, they had this 5 years of Venus Dasha, after which they moved into Sun, after which they moved into Moon. And you can make it more nuanced. So when they were in Venus Dasha, for this person, Venus rules the 3rd and the 8th house. It rules the sign of Taurus, like we saw, and it rules the sign of Libra. So the 8th house is constantly transforming your individual self, but in a very Libra kind of way. So they were learning Libra lessons, or they were transforming their soul through trying to figure out how to work with other people, how to be diplomatic, how to balance give and take. Libra is very driven by equality, right? And also Taurus, which is their 3rd house, but it is creating stability and structure. So wanting to have a secure life, but then as soon as they get that security, being able to express their skill set and their interests and their egos and their frictions and their little squabbles with their siblings or their playmates in a secure, loving, abundant environment. So you can see that how Venus would play that out. After that, they went into Sun in 79, and you can imagine it's just like a 5-year-old child, right? So Sun rules Leo, which is the 6th house for this person. And the transition between Venus to Sun is kind of a tough one, because Venus is very gentle and Sun is very fiery and focused. So it can feel a little bit jarring. There are certain transitions that feel very very intense. Venus to Sun feels the most intense, because Venus is just so gentle and Sun is just so fiery and focused. So in this chart, sun rules the sixth house, and because this is a 5-year-old kid, I wouldn't expect them to get into battles or have enemies. If they do, we can see that in conversations, but more so, I would expect them to fall sick a lot. Sixth house has to do with sickness. Uh, I wouldn't expect them, because this is, again, you have to put in context how old this person is. I wouldn't expect them to like work hard, pay off debt, things like that. But of course, feeling the pressure of money, feeling the pressure of working hard. Maybe the family was working really hard, falling sick a lot. The sixth lord is also in the 12th, so there's a Vipreet Raja Yoga, which we are not going to go into right now. And then so on and so forth. You can see when in 1985, when they were about 11 years old, they went into moon. Right now, this person is, so what's today's date? Today is 28th of February. So you can see the person recently, so on that center table, if you look at the right hand side, they recently entered Jupiter Mahadasha. It was last year, 2020. So right now they're still in Jupiter, and the sub cycle is also Jupiter. So Jupiter, in like a year and a half, they will go into Jupiter Saturn. But once they went into Jupiter last year in June, you can see Jupiter rules their first house, which is Pisces, and it has an exalted planet there. And then it also rules the 10th house, which is Sagittarius. And so what came into focus is they themselves, their own identity, their true identity, and how it plays out in their career, right? That becomes a big theme. How am I deriving my self-worth, my own identity, or getting validated from my career? And how correct, or how fruitful, or how draining that whole exercise is. That's what this individual right now is learning through. So you can when you're looking at the ripening of karmas, based on everything we talked about, based upon signs, houses, rulerships, what planets rule which sign, you can get a pretty good picture of what they are experiencing. You can add another layer of nuance to it by looking at what nakshatras are being activated, and that adds a deeper layer. And this is something that you can easily learn and practice, even on your own chart, like just trying to understand what's happening in your life, how things are ripening in your life, and what lessons are being brought to you. Because a lot of times we just are trying to go about life like shooting in the dark, right? Throwing a dart in the dark kind of a thing. But this can bring in a lot more awareness. And as most psychologists these days talk about, awareness, having that right awareness or the aligned awareness, is like 70% of the job done. Right?
Yeah. Beautiful.
The next slide. So I've used the word actions, but literally what I mean is karma. Karma is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And it's touching upon that point of what creates suffering. That suffering comes from that resistance to that karma, right? And if you think about resistance, literally, if you think about using if you think about pushing a heavy object with another metal slab, you're trying to push it, you're trying to create a force, you're trying to create resistance. So resistance itself has a lot of energy behind it, whether you understand it or not. But if you're, what I mean is whether you are aware of it or not. So resistance itself creates karma, creates more karma, because it's a force in itself. So exertion of force is what action is, right? Action is exertion of force, which actually creates karma. So you can really make suffering as just an option, if you understand that process and lower your resistance. It also brings into question what good karma versus bad karma is. And a lot of people uh, think about, even in the South Asian communities, think about good karma. If I do this, good things will come. But really, there is no good karma or bad karma. The intention, like we talked about, behind you performing that karma is also important. So if you come at the table thinking you are going to manipulate that cause and effect, you're going to create a particular effect because you're going to manipulate your actions, that's going to in the end be futile because it's so complex and it's so vast that you can only focus on what's at hand right now. Which brings me to the quote, the next slide, that I'm actually, this is a quote from Bhagavad Gita, and it's very apt to this conversation and the question that was asked, which is, the quote goes as, Karmanyevadikaraste ma phalechu kadachana. Literally means you're entitled to either execute that karma or not. So the karma penetrates the mind, and then it's your free will, it's your entitlement whether you execute that karma or not. That's your right. Ma phalechu kadachana. But the fruits of that karma do not belong to you, or the consequence of the karma doesn't belong to you. The consequence belongs to the universe, to God, to the Paramatman. So literally the Jivatman, which is not that separate from the Paramatman, performing this karma, has a choice whether it wants to perform the karma or not. But the consequence or the fruits of that karma doesn't even belong to that Jivatman. It belongs to the Paramatman. It belongs to the universe. So whatever you do in this life doesn't belong to you. It belongs, the entire effect belongs to somebody, a force that's higher than you. Ma karma phala hetu bhu mate sangotsva karmani. This is a very important line to remember. Ma karma phal hetu bhu. So, it really means like, let there not be any motivation or an intention. The hetu is the agenda, that intention. Let there not be an agenda behind you performing your karmas to produce a certain outcome, which is what we talked about, right? Because that intention itself that we talked in the beginning creates more karma. It's not just that action, that intention behind that action participates in that karma. So again, you can distill this down to being very simplistic, which is like, do not be attached to the results of your karma, and do not come at it with an agenda or a certain intention that you want to create something out of it. For example, and I'll give you this example, one of my spiritual teachers long ago, a couple of years ago, told me, because I was going through certain things in life, to cook food for homeless people on Saturdays and distribute food. And in the beginning, I started doing it because I was like, oh, this is going to elevate my pain, and this is going to make things better for me. And the more I did that, the more it didn't feel good. I had resistance towards going and performing this act of service because I had a selfish motive behind it. Over a period of time, that motive fell away, that hetu fell away. And I realized that when I cook and when I share food, it's not even donating food, or I'm not volunteering. I just like, all those words dropped away. And it was like me cooking food and sharing it with that other human being, and just the joy of that sharing without thinking of them as homeless or somebody at a disadvantage. just like removed all that resistance, and it created such sweetness within me that was not there when I was thinking of that whole process as, okay, I'll do this for 3 months and then everything is going to be all right in my life, or the things that were not working around that time will work out. Because in those 3 months, what I was trying to do, I was trying to achieve a result, and I actually didn't achieve those results. Uh, so instead of thinking of it like, oh, this act of service didn't work in my favor, I actually really had to drop all my agenda around it and come at it from a more open-hearted, non-intentional, non-manipulation, not manipulating the whole situation in a way, right? And the last part of this whole shloka tells that also you have to not be attached or to not performing karmas. So you cannot be attached to not performing karma. Not performing karma is not an option in the end. And what it really means is, it's not contradicting the first segment of the statement, but what it really means is there is no other option for you other than participate in this life and death cycle, right? And when we talk about moksha, and I was one of those people, I wanted liberation. I started on the spiritual journey because I wanted liberation from incarnation. I didn't want to be incarnated again. I wanted moksha from the cycle of birth and death, which is literally moksha from performing, or liberation from performing karmas. And that's what I was attached to. But in the true sense, if the karma and the fruits of that karma, the consequence, do not belong to me, then I should not have any attachment towards whether I'm performing the karma or not performing it. So this shloka from Bhagavad Gita, which is so deep and has so many layers, and we can talk about it for hours and hours. I put it at the end to really sum up what I was trying to explain, because karma is so difficult and dense to explain, right? And before we close for today and we start taking more questions, I wanted to correct something that I talked about yesterday. Can we go to the next slide? I did a presentation on how spirit takes form. And this is when these things, the next slide, these things happen when you do math and geometry in your head, but you actually don't do it on paper, and you can make mistakes. So I was showing the precession of equinoxes and how that translates to the sky around Earth. And so the 0 degree Ashwini, or 0 degrees Aries, is pinned, like I said, and the northern pole is actually precessed, or the axis of the Earth, because of the tilt, is precessed about 24 degrees now. But I was showing that whole precession in the opposite direction. So this this is what it was. And in the next slide, I've just shown the picture of the Earth itself, because I was trying to merge two pictures, and I'm not a graphic artist, so I did a sloppy job. And I made a mistake in the whole process, so I'm correcting it now for whoever watches this. You can see the ecliptic, the magenta circle. The ecliptic is the plane in which the Earth revolves around the sun, and there is a tilt, and that tilt keeps moving. The axis is tilted for about 24 degrees now, and then the perpendicular line to the ecliptic is what points to 0 degrees Aries, or 0 degree Ashwini. So I'm just trying to clarify it.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think
Yeah.
it's for most people, it will be a minor point, but it's nice to have the clarity. We
Yeah.
have just a couple minutes. If there are any questions, please bring them in. And please, I will be sending out this information when I send out, I'm going to send out all of the talks in a single collection that you can access. But of course, for consultations, you can contact Malini. She's a really gifted Jyotishi, and so you can contact her at Cosmic Art and Science, which is her website. And then there's the Next Generation of Vedic Astrology conference, or are we calling it a conference? It's a set of teachings, really, March 19th through 21st, with one of our teachers, Sam Gepi, and then a series of very talented astrologers are going to be presented. But we have just a couple minutes for questions, and then we're actually going straight into our next talk. Let's see here. Very interesting. There is a question about intention, and if a soldier goes into battle, and intention is to fight and defend his country. However, his executed action kills other people. What kind of karma does the soldier take on? The intention or the actual action? And we probably don't have time to go deep into it, but if you have any final thoughts or comments there.
I think we have to clarify judgment versus intention and action.
Yes.
The soldier is performing what his signed up duty or his job is to perform. So we cannot judge whether it's a good karma or bad karma, whether he's taking on the karma or he's performing karma, right? And the whole thing about when we talk about taking on karma, we think about we're taking on a load of rocks, we're taking on burden. But we are, if you think about it as a play, and we are all just actors in that play, the actor, which is a soldier, is performing his or her assigned role in that play. So we don't take on any karma, if that's the question. Nobody takes on karma. If anybody takes on karma, it's the Paramatman. We are just the actors in this huge play.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Malini. This is very deep and rich, and we appreciate you so much. And I'll be sending out the recordings